Hey there. Tonight, we're stepping away from dusty timelines and battle-scarred epics, and climbing somewhere a bit higher. Not to the realm of mortals, but to Mount Olympus itself, where the air is rich with ambrosia, the clouds carry gossip, and the gods. Well, let's just say they were a lot messier than their statues suggest. If this kind of storytelling helps you unwind, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it truly brings you peace. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. There's always something comforting about seeing others drift off to the same quiet mythology. So, get comfortable. Let the world settle around you. And let's begin with what the Olympian gods were really like. Let us begin, as all good stories ought to begin, with a mountain at dusk. Not just any mountain, mind you, Mount Olympus, the divine residence of the gods, where the clouds gather like courtly drapery and the air smells faintly of ambrosia, and perhaps, on occasion, burnt offerings wafting up from the mortal world far below. It stands tall and regal on the northern frontier of ancient Greece, its summit so often hidden by mist that it seemed only natural to assume someone or something must be living up there. In truth, Olympus is a very real mountain, the highest in Greece actually, rising to just under 10,000 feet. But to the ancient Greeks, it wasn't merely a collection of rocks and ridges. No, it was sacred geography. It was the celestial seat of power, draped in ever-changing light and ever-watchful silence. They saw it not as something to be climbed, but to be revered. A divine penthouse, if you like, with rather exclusive tenants. And those tenants are, yes, the Olympians. 12 gods and goddesses, give or take a few, depending on which myth you believe, and how generous you're feeling with seating arrangements. Together, they form the core of the ancient Greek pantheon. Capricious, passionate, thunderous, petty, brilliant. And they were worshipped, feared, and occasionally gossiped about for centuries. Quite like celebrities, really. If celebrities could hurl lightning and turn people into olive trees. But before we meet them individually, let's linger a little on the setting. For it's twilight on Olympus, the hour when the golden light fades gently behind marble colonnades and divine banquets are just beginning. Imagine wide halls gleaming with polished stone, lyres playing softly in the background, and long tables groaning with impossible fruits, cheeses aged by the winds of prophecy, and wines so potent they'd make a satyr weep with joy. This is no place of solemnity. Olympus, in myth, was vibrant, divine, occasionally chaotic, like a very large dysfunctional family gathering with a healthy sprinkling of immortality and magical livestock. The kind of place where someone is always playing a harp, and someone else is always dramatically storming out. Now, if you're imagining marble floors and ionic columns, you're not entirely off base, but don't expect a neatly catalogued palace blueprint. The earliest Greek poets, Homer and Hesiod, speak of radiant halls and cloud gates, but they weren't exactly architectural draftsmen. What we're given is a suggestion of immense beauty, shimmering materials, and eternal comfort. Halls of bronze and gold, courtyards paved with sunlight, feasts that never end, and fountains that sing. It's less of a building and more of a heavenly ambience. And what's a good ambience without a menu? You'll be pleased to know the gods dined rather well. Their diet consisted primarily of two things: ambrosia and nectar. not to be confused with a posh London cafe. Ambrosia was said to be the food of immortality. What it actually tasted like depends on the source. Some say honeyed bread, others a kind of fragrant perfume you absorbed through your very essence, which frankly sounds more like skincare than a starter. Nectar, its liquid companion, flowed like sunlight in a chalice, served in cups of gold, and kept everyone in a perpetually divine state of health, youth, and likely a mild buzz. The gods didn't age. They didn't get ill. They didn't suffer the usual indignities of mortal life, apart from emotional outbursts, which, if anything, they had in abundance. The divine lifestyle was not without its duties, however. Each god had a portfolio, so to speak. Zeus, for example, handled thunderstorms, law, and infidelity. Poseidon had dominion over the sea, earthquakes, and moody tridents. Athena took care of wisdom, war strategy, and glowering from behind shields. Each Olympian had their domain, and while some took their roles seriously, others used them as an excuse to meddle in mortal affairs or skip staff meetings altogether. One might imagine that a day on Olympus involved quite a lot of sitting around looking powerful, which, to be fair, it probably did. But it also meant making decisions. Would a hero succeed in his quest? Would a city be blessed with rain, or buried under ash? Would a mortal's prayer be answered or ignored? The gods were not bound by logic. They were divine after all, and if they seemed inconsistent, well, that was rather the point. The world was unpredictable, and so were its rulers. From their cloud-wrapped thrones, the gods watched mortals go about their business with varying degrees of interest. They observed, they judged, they laughed, they wept occasionally, and sometimes they interfered, often dramatically. The line between gods and mortals, you see, was not quite so firm in ancient Greek thought. The gods were not distant deities, unreachable and abstract. They were near, familiar, emotionally turbulent. They could take human form, walk among us, fall in love, or lust more often, and produce heroes with a knack for slaying monsters and starting wars. Their children became demigods, whose lives were extraordinary but seldom long. But Olympus itself was different. It was the place the gods returned to, a safe haven above the chaos of the world. Imagine, if you will, the moment after a storm, the clouds parting, a golden glow returning, and silence falling over the peaks. That was Olympus. Not a realm of perfection, but of divine pause. The only real constant in a world where nothing else lasted. Now, about the company kept on this mountaintop. We often refer to the 12 Olympians, but the list wasn't entirely fixed. It usually included Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Demeter, Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Ares, Hephaestus, Aphrodite, Hermes, and either Dionysus or Hestia. Poor Hestia was occasionally bumped from the guest list, despite being the goddess of the hearth. One assumes she didn't mind. She always struck me as someone who preferred a quiet evening by the fire to a thunderbolt measuring contest between brothers. Each god brought something unique to the table. Apollo, radiant and polished, never without his lyre or a cryptic prophecy. Artemis, watchful and swift, ever elusive beneath the trees. Ares, brawny and brash, the kind of guest who eats all the olives and breaks the furniture. Aphrodite, all soft glances and dangerously persuasive silences. And Hermes, that wily trickster with a grin that said he'd already stolen your sandals. They were gods, yes, but unmistakably human in spirit. That was the genius of Greek mythology. Its divinities reflected us in all our glittering flaws. The Greeks built temples to honour them, yes, magnificent columns rising toward the sky, sanctuaries thick with incense and prayer. But they also told stories, myths passed from lips to ears, campfires to amphitheatres, stories of love, betrayal, pride, revenge, stories that taught, warned, entertained. Olympus was not just a place above the clouds. It was a theatre stage, a family drama, a mirror of the human soul raised to cosmic scale. And what of the mortals who gazed up toward the summit? They knew they would never see its peak. Olympus was shrouded not just in clouds, but in mystery. No human was meant to reach it, not really. Those who tried, like the Titan Atlas, who bore the sky on his back, often paid dearly for their ambition. Olympus was a place of dreams. It was not for climbing, it was for imagining. And imagine it they did, the poets especially. Homer, in his Iliad and Odyssey, filled Olympus with radiant halls and divine disputes. Hesiod gave it grandeur, genealogy, structure. Later playwrights gave it irony, philosophers gave it doubt, but always Olympus remained, serene, glowing, gently aloof. Today, the mountain still stands. People hike it now, of course, in sturdy boots with trail mix and GPS. They reach the summit and see the land stretch far in all directions, the Aegean in the distance, fields below like faded mosaics. But they do not find temples, only wind and sky, and the sense of something ancient watching quietly. The gods may not live there anymore, but their stories linger in the air. And perhaps, as the sun sets over the crags and shadows pool like old wine, one might close their eyes and hear, faintly, the sound of laughter carried on the breeze, a harp, a voice, a divine footstep, something not entirely gone. So let us leave Olympus now, with a gentle step and a quiet heart. The gods are at their table, the torches are lit, and the stars have begun to shimmer above their golden halls. Sleep well, traveller, you're in good company now. We begin tonight with the sound of distant thunder. Not the kind that announces a storm, mind you. No, this one rolls in slow and steady, like a drumbeat from the heavens, accompanied by a flicker of lightning that's more theatrical than threatening. You see, when Zeus makes an entrance, he does enjoy a bit of atmosphere. Zeus, king of the gods, ruler of Olympus, lord of thunder, rain, and the celestial order, and, incidentally, one of the most complicated family men in all of mythology, which, considering his company, is really saying something. But let's not start with his scandals just yet. First, let us imagine him as the Greeks once did, seated high on his throne atop Olympus, robed in flowing white and gold, a sceptre in one hand, a thunderbolt in the other, and an expression that oscillates somewhere between stern authority and amused distraction. Around him, the air hums with power. He is not just a king. He is the very embodiment of law, order, and cosmic balance, most of the time. Zeus did not inherit Olympus by luck. His story begins in the deep past, long before there were temples, poets, or polite prayer. Born to the Titans Cronus and Rhea, Zeus was the youngest of 6 children, and the only one not immediately swallowed at birth. Yes, swallowed. Cronus, their father, had a nasty habit of eating his offspring to avoid being overthrown. It's the sort of parenting style that usually lands one on a watch list. But Rhea, the clever mother that she was, spirited baby Zeus away and tricked Cronus with a swaddled rock, which he, rather embarrassingly, swallowed whole. Meanwhile, Zeus grew up hidden in a cave on the island of Crete, raised by nymphs, suckled by a magical goat, and protected by divine warriors who clashed their spears to muffle his cries. A rather noisy nursery, but effective nonetheless. When Zeus came of age, he did what any ambitious son of prophecy might do. He returned, tricked Cronus into disgorging his siblings, and led a divine rebellion known as the Titanomachy. For 10 years, the younger gods, the Olympians, battled the old order, until Zeus hurled the final thunderbolt and sealed their victory. The Titans were cast into Tartarus, a sort of godly oubliette, and Olympus was claimed. This, then, was how Zeus became king. Not by birthright, but by cleverness, courage, and, it must be said, a knack for dramatic timing. As king, Zeus wasn't merely a figurehead. He governed the skies, yes, but also oaths, hospitality, and justice. If someone broke a sacred promise, it was Zeus they feared. If a stranger arrived at your door, you offered them food and drink in Zeus's name. He was, in many ways, the god of social glue, the one who held things together, even if his own household was often teetering on the brink. Now, if you'll forgive a brief aside, no discussion of Zeus is complete without addressing the, shall we say, romantic entanglements. Zeus, it must be admitted, had a wandering eye, and foot, and the occasional animal disguise. His liaisons with mortal women, and quite a few goddesses, form a veritable catalogue of ancient myths. Sometimes he approached them in the form of a handsome man, other times as a swan, a bull, a shower of golden light. Whatever works, I suppose. These unions produced many of the great heroes of Greek mythology: Heracles, Perseus, Helen of Troy, Minos, and so on. Each was born of a different woman, each destined for a different path, and each a small stitch in the grand tapestry of Zeus's legacy, though perhaps not the sort of legacy Hera, his wife, had in mind. Ah yes, Hera, queen of the gods, goddess of marriage, and long-suffering spouse of the most prolific philanderer in Olympus. Their marriage, as immortal as it was, would not be described as tranquil. Hera was dignified, intelligent, and ferociously proud. Zeus, for his part, loved her, in his own way, but that didn't stop him from repeatedly testing the limits of her patience. If you've ever attended a family dinner where no one mentions the elephant in the room, and then Zeus turns into that elephant, well, you begin to get the idea. Their quarrels were the stuff of legend. Sometimes Hera would attempt to outwit or even overthrow her husband. Once, she orchestrated a rebellion among the Olympians, and Zeus had to be rescued by a 100-armed giant named Briareus. Another time, he suspended her from the sky by golden chains as punishment. Not his finest moment, to be sure. But always they reconciled, or at least reached a détente. Immortality is a long time, after all. One does get used to things. Yet Zeus's story is not all mischief and lightning. He was also the arbiter of cosmic balance. When mortals committed crimes or acted with hubris, that dangerous blend of arrogance and defiance, it was Zeus who issued judgment. He sent omens. He dispatched the Furies. He struck down the proud. But he also rewarded virtue. He upheld the sacred bonds of guest and host. And he listened to prayer. The Greeks saw him as the great anchor of divine authority. His image adorned temples, coins, and statues across the ancient world. In Olympia, a colossal gold and ivory statue of Zeus sat within the grand temple, crafted by the sculptor Phidias, and counted among the 7 wonders of the ancient world. He was not merely a myth. He was a cultural cornerstone. And yet, there's something very human about him, isn't there? For all his thunderbolts and grandeur, Zeus often behaved like an exasperated father trying to keep a house full of eccentric children from setting the curtains on fire. He meddled in Trojan politics. He weighed the fates of heroes in battle. He tried, often in vain, to maintain order on Olympus. It was a divine soap opera, and Zeus was both director and reluctant lead. He could be merciful, forgiving Prometheus, for instance, after centuries of punishment for stealing fire for mankind. And he could be vengeful, as when he flooded the earth to cleanse it of human wickedness. But above all, Zeus was consistent in one regard. He reminded mortals of the limits of their reach. In the myths, those who challenged him, whether giants or kings, almost always fell. Not because Zeus hated them, necessarily, but because the natural order had to be preserved. And order was what Zeus valued most. In the post-Titan world, the universe was no longer chaos and darkness. It had rhythm, seasons, laws. The stars wheeled in the sky. The rains came and went. Cities rose and fell, but the heavens endured. And somewhere, high above, Zeus watched it all. Now it's easy to imagine him as simply a tyrant with a thunderbolt, but I prefer to think of him as something more complex. A divine figure who carried the weight of the world's unpredictability on his shoulders. One who stood between the realm of mortals and the unknown beyond. One who roared and wept and raged, not because he was cruel, but because the world was full of choices, and none of them ever simple. Even the gods had their burdens. So when we picture him, let it be not only with power in his gaze, but with weariness behind it. For though he was the king, his rule was never quiet. There was always a new hero to watch, a new war to judge, a new prophecy to ponder. And all the while the wind shifted, the clouds gathered, and somewhere down below, a poet whispered his name. Tonight, the thunder is distant, the skies are calm. Zeus reclines in his hall, the firelight glinting off his crown, and the world, for the moment, is at peace. The stars blink overhead like ancient eyes, and the mountain breathes its slow, eternal rhythm. Sleep now. You are under the watchful gaze of the King of Olympus, and he is feeling merciful tonight. Settle in now. The lamps are low, the fire is quiet, and tonight we turn our attention to Hera, Queen of the Gods. You've already met her husband Zeus in all his thunder-tossing, shape-shifting glory. But Hera is something quite different. Not a ruler of the skies, not a wielder of storms or prophecies, but the quiet and steady heart of Olympus. And, on more than one occasion, the source of a sharp look that could turn a lesser deity into stone, or at the very least send them scuttling off to a minor temple in Thessaly. She was, and remains, the goddess of marriage, of women, of childbirth, and of regal dignity. But Hera is not merely domestic. She is not gentle in the way springtime is gentle. She is fierce, enduring, intelligent, and more than capable of making her displeasure known, particularly when it concerns the many, many indiscretions of her husband. But we'll get to that in good time. First, let us begin at the beginning, at her birth, long before Olympus was even built. Hera was born to the Titans, Cronus and Rhea. Yes, that same Cronus who had a rather troubling habit of swallowing his children whole. Hera, like her siblings Hestia, Demeter, Hades and Poseidon, vanished into the belly of her father until Zeus, the youngest and savviest of the lot, rescued them all. One does not typically think of rebirth as an act of digestion, but mythology rarely bothers with subtlety. When Zeus freed his siblings and overthrew the old order, Hera emerged into the world anew. Though younger than her brother husband, yes, mythology is like that, she quickly established herself not just as his consort, but as his equal in divine authority. She was not merely Zeus's wife, she was the queen of Olympus, crowned in her own right. And how did they meet? Well, Zeus, naturally, pursued her with all the subtlety of a lightning storm. But Hera, clever and cautious, was not so easily impressed. She resisted his advances, holding him at bay until he employed one of his more peculiar courtship strategies. Disguising himself as a helpless cuckoo bird, he flung himself into her lap, trembling and pitiful. Touched by pity, she cradled the bird, at which point he transformed back into himself, and, in classic divine fashion, took her by surprise. It's not exactly romantic by modern standards, but in the mythological world it was practically a sonnet. Their marriage, however, was far from idyllic. Hera, the goddess of marriage itself, found herself bound to a husband whose fidelity was about as stable as a chariot with one wheel. Zeus's dalliances with mortal women, nymphs, and even other goddesses became the stuff of legend and tragedy. Each time he strayed, Hera's response was not silence or resignation. It was vengeance, measured, precise, and often deeply poetic. But let us be fair. Hera's anger wasn't blind rage. It was rooted in dignity, in a deep sense of what was proper, sacred, and just. She did not lash out without cause. When she punished, she did so with the calm certainty of a queen upholding order in a realm that seemed determined to unravel. Consider, for instance, the tale of Io, a mortal priestess whom Zeus fancied. When Hera came sniffing around, Zeus panicked and turned Io into a white cow. Hera, of course, saw right through this bovine charade. She accepted the cow as a gift, ever so graciously, and appointed Argus, a giant with 100 eyes, to guard her. Not the subtlest move, but effective. Zeus, desperate, sent Hermes to lull Argus to sleep with stories and music. And once all 100 eyes had closed, Hermes dispatched him. Hera was furious. She retrieved the cowgirl Io and placed Argus's many eyes onto the tail of her sacred bird, the peacock, a detail that endures in the bird's plumage to this day. That's the thing about Hera. She didn't forget. She memorialized. She took insults and carved them into the stars, into feathers, into stone. Not out of spite, but out of principle. Her world was order, and when it was disrupted, she responded accordingly. Another tale, this one involving Heracles, one of Zeus's many sons by another woman. Hera hated him from the moment he drew breath. She sent serpents into his cradle. She drove him to madness. She placed obstacles in his path at every turn. And yet, in an irony almost too perfect, it was Heracles, after his death, who was welcomed into Olympus and reconciled with Hera, even marrying her daughter Hebe. One imagines the family dinners were tense. But Hera was not merely an angry wife. That's a simplification, and an unfair one. She was the goddess to whom women prayed for safe childbirth, for a stable home, for the sacred bond of marriage to hold firm. She was protector and patroness of queens. Her temples were among the most splendid in Greece, particularly the great Heraion near Argos, where priestesses performed elaborate rituals and dedicated their lives to her service. She was also embodiment of regal poise. When Homer describes her in the Iliad, it's with a kind of awed reverence. Tall, proud, golden-eyed. She rides in a chariot pulled by peacocks, wears a crown that gleams with the fire of heaven, and speaks with a voice that can silence a room full of immortals. Even Zeus, for all his bluster, knew when to tread carefully around Hera. Their marriage, for all its strife, was also a political bond, a symbol of cosmic balance. Zeus representing raw power and law, and Hera representing loyalty, structure, and sacred tradition. Together they ruled not just Olympus, but the framework of the Greek cosmos. Their quarrels were myth, yes, but they also reflected the eternal struggle between freedom and fidelity, chaos and order, impulse and restraint. To worship Hera was not to adore gentleness. It was to honour strength wrapped in dignity. It was to recognise that the world needs not just storms, but boundaries. That love is not always sweet. Sometimes it is fierce, wounded, enduring. Sometimes it clenches its jaw and carries on for the sake of something larger than the self. She had her moments of compassion too. She aided Jason and the Argonauts. She watched over women in labour. She lent power to those who upheld justice. In some myths, she is a maternal figure, not soft, but solid. The kind of mother who might not kiss your scrapes, but who would stand between you and a charging bull without flinching. In art, she is nearly always majestic, seated on a throne, a sceptre in one hand, a lotus-tipped staff, or a pomegranate in the other. The pomegranate, as you might recall, being a symbol of fertility and the cycle of life, one that appears frequently in ancient depictions of divine queenship. Her sacred animals, beyond the peacock, include the cow, not merely for its docility, but for its association with nurturing and steadfastness. There's a reason the Romans called her Juno, and made her the chief goddess of their pantheon. Hera's archetype, the divine matron, both feared and revered, echoes across countless cultures. She is not a goddess who fades with time. She is one who endures it. And so we imagine her now, seated in her radiant hall, high above the clouds, the golden light of Olympus falling across her brow. The peacocks shuffle softly at her feet. The fires crackle low. A divine scroll rests beside her. Perhaps a new list of grievances, or a wedding invitation, or both. The gods around her quarrel and bicker, laugh and sulk, but Hera remains still, watchful. She does not always speak first, but when she does, Olympus listens. Tonight, her gaze is calm. Her court is quiet. Somewhere in the mortal world, a marriage is made, a child is born, a vow is kept, and the Queen of the Heavens for once is at peace. Sleep now, traveller. You rest beneath her watchful eyes, and she never forgets. The sea, even now, holds a kind of ancient silence, a deep, breathing presence beneath the surface, never quite still, never fully asleep. And in that timeless blue, long before sailors traced constellations or merchants dreamed of distant shores, the Greeks believed something older stirred, something powerful, proud, and on occasion rather moody. Poseidon, brother to Zeus and Hades, god of the sea, earthquakes, horses, and, quite notably, grudges. While Zeus ruled the skies and Hades reigned below, Poseidon claimed everything that foamed, surged, churned, and crashed. The sea, after all, was not merely water to the ancient Greeks. It was a force, a frontier, a mystery. And Poseidon was its sovereign. Imagine him now, tall, muscular, bearded like a storm-beaten king. hair tangled with salt and seaweed, his trident gleaming with the wet glint of dawn tides. He does not float above the clouds like his brother. He rides the crests of waves, pulled by hippocamps, those mythical seahorses with hooves of foam and manes like river reeds. When he speaks, it's with the low rumble of tectonic plates shifting beneath your feet. He is the voice of the ocean floor, old, rumbling, and not particularly patient. His realm is vast, not only the sea itself, but every inlet, spring, and underground stream. Sailors prayed to him before journeys. Fishermen whispered his name over their nets. Even those on dry land, far from the coast, feared his wrath. Earthquakes, which the Greeks called Poseidon shaking the ground, were seen as his doing. You may recall, he's not the type to knock politely when displeased. Like his brothers, Poseidon's origin begins in darkness, swallowed, like the rest of his siblings, by Cronus, then freed by Zeus. After the Titanomachy, the war against the old gods, the world was divided. Zeus took the sky, Hades took the underworld. Poseidon was given the sea, not as a consolation prize, mind you, but as a dominion equal in majesty and terror. And to be fair, it rather suited him. Poseidon's nature was not, shall we say, consistent. Some days he was beneficent, the god who granted calm winds, guided ships safely home, and coaxed fresh water from dry earth. Other times, not so much. He could whip the sea into a frenzy, send monstrous waves toward unsuspecting shores, and summon sea beasts large enough to snack on entire cities. He was not cruel, simply temperamental. The sea, after all, is both giver and taker, and so was he. One of his more famous tempers was directed at a city we now know as Athens. You see, Poseidon and his niece Athena both wished to become its patron deity. The gods proposed a contest. Each would present a gift, and the people would choose which god to honour. Poseidon struck the earth with his trident and produced a spring, though awkwardly it was salt water, which isn't terribly helpful inland. Athena, meanwhile, offered the olive tree, a symbol of peace, prosperity, and rather useful for cooking. The Athenians, ever practical, chose her. Poseidon, in classic form, did not take the loss well. He flooded parts of the land in retaliation, and though things eventually settled, it was clear losing was not something he tolerated gracefully. His relationships, like his tempers, were turbulent. He married a sea goddess named Amphitrite, one of the 50 Nereids. She initially fled his courtship, which involved a fair bit of chasing and the help of a dolphin. Yes, really. But eventually she relented, and they settled into what was, by Olympian standards, a relatively stable marriage. Their son Triton was half man, half fish, and often depicted blowing a conch shell to calm or summon the waves. That said, Poseidon was not the most faithful of husbands. His list of lovers and offspring rivals that of Zeus, and includes mortals, nymphs, and even creatures of his own making. His most famous children include the winged horse Pegasus, born from Medusa's severed neck after Poseidon, rather undiplomatically, had pursued her in Athena's temple. There's also Polyphemus, the Cyclops, who rather famously got on the wrong side of Odysseus. But more on that later. Poseidon's power was vast, but it was not always respected, especially by heroes who ought to have known better. Take Odysseus, for example. After blinding Polyphemus during his long journey home from Troy, he made the fatal error of taunting the Cyclops, whose father, of course, was Poseidon. This turned what should have been a 10-day voyage into a 10-year epic filled with shipwrecks, sirens, and sulking gods. The lesson? Never anger the man who controls your travel plans. Yet Poseidon was also a builder. He helped construct the walls of Troy, though when the king refused to pay him properly, Poseidon ensured the city would one day fall. Again, we return to the theme of divine memory. The Olympians, especially Poseidon, had long memories, and an even longer sense of justice when they felt slighted. Worship of Poseidon was widespread in coastal regions. The Isthmus of Corinth housed one of his major temples, a grand structure where sailors and seagoers offered sacrifices for safe passage. Horses were sacred to him, not just sea horses, but earthly ones too. He was said to have created the first horse, striking the earth with his trident. In some myths, he's even credited with teaching humanity how to harness their strength. A reminder that Poseidon, though wild, could be generous when honoured properly. But the sea is not merely geography. To the Greeks, it was a living presence. It connected lands, carried myths, swallowed empires. And Poseidon was its voice, never entirely predictable, but always aware. His temples stood open to the wind. His statues looked outward toward the horizon. The sea was his, and so was the space between. He was also deeply involved in the origin stories of many islands. Greek mythology is filled with accounts of Poseidon raising lands from the sea, or smashing them in fits of wrath. The island of Delos, sacred to Apollo and Artemis, was said to have once floated freely across the Aegean until Poseidon anchored it in place. There were times, too, when he struck land into being, new shores rising in tribute to his power. In festivals, Poseidon's worshippers did not always offer their prayers in gentle tones. Sacrifices were often made with a mix of fear and reverence. At some coastal sites, entire horses were driven into the sea as offerings, not out of cruelty, but because Poseidon's hunger was thought to match the size of his domain. He was not a half-god, not a tender god. He was primal, elemental. Even the Romans, who called him Neptune, retained this vision of a forceful, ocean-bound deity. His image persisted through empires, carved into stone, etched into coins, guiding ships long after belief in him had faded. The sea, after all, does not forget its gods so easily. We imagine him now in his underwater palace, made of coral and pearl, the walls shimmering with light filtered through leagues of ocean. Sea nymphs glide past like shadows. Triton's conch echoes faintly through distant caverns. Poseidon himself sits upon a throne of stone and shell, gazing out across his domain, silent but not still, never still. He does not speak often, but when he does, the waters respond. Perhaps he watches the mortals sailing above, their sails full of borrowed wind, their ships no more than fragile bones upon the deep. Perhaps he lets them pass. Or perhaps he sends a gentle ripple, just a reminder that he is there. Not cruel, this god, but not forgetful. He embodies the sea, vast, mercurial, essential. A god of storms and silences alike. And for the Greeks, he was not to be loved blindly, but respected absolutely. So tonight, as you drift toward dreams, let the rhythm of waves soothe your mind. The ocean has its stories, old and echoing. And far beneath, Poseidon rests, not sleeping but listening. Sleep well now. The sea is calm tonight, and he allows it. Beneath the world we know, beneath the mountain roots and the drifting ocean floor, there lies a place older than memory. darker than night, and stiller than time. It is not a place of fire, though later ages would say so. Nor is it a prison. It is simply what comes next. The Greeks called it the underworld, and at its quiet centre sits Hades, god of the dead. Hades, the eldest son of Cronus and Rhea, did not rule Olympus. He did not hurl thunder or stir the seas. His power did not flash. It endured. When the world was divided among the three brothers after the defeat of the Titans, Zeus drew the sky, Poseidon the sea, and Hades, without protest, accepted the land beneath the earth. Some say he was unlucky. Others say he chose it. In truth, Hades never needed spectacle to be sovereign. He simply was. He is a god of silence, not absence, not cruelty, silence. In myth, he rarely shouts or boasts. He acts with measure, with weight. Mortals feared him, yes, but they also respected him. Not because he brought death, he did not, but because he received it. Because all roads in time lead to him. His realm is vast, layered like the roots of a great tree. The dead come by way of Hermes, who guides them gently down. At the threshold waits Charon, the ferryman, demanding his coin. It was for this reason that Greeks placed obols in the mouths of their dead. To be caught without payment meant wandering the shores of the Styx forever, unheard and unmourned. And the Styx is only one of many rivers. There is the Acheron, river of pain, the Cocytus, river of lamentation, the Phlegethon, which burns without consuming, and Lethe, river of forgetfulness, whose waters wash the mind to sleep. Each river marks a passage, not just in distance, but in meaning. They do not flow through geography. They flow through memory, through fear, through hope. The dead are judged by three ancient kings, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus. Most souls go to the asphodel meadows, where they drift in a dreamless peace, unremarkable, undisturbed. A few, the wicked, descend to Tartarus, the deepest pit where punishment suits the crime, and a rare few, the most noble, ascend to the Elysian fields, a place of music, sunlight, and soft breezes, where even in death the good may breathe freely. This realm is Hades' charge. He governs it not with fire, but with order. He is not cruel, he is not kind. He simply ensures that what must be, is, that every soul is received, remembered, and placed. There is dignity in that, and yet despite this, he is often misunderstood. In art and story, he is sometimes mistaken for the villain, perhaps because death itself is feared, and he is its face. But Hades is no more evil than gravity. He does not hunt souls. He does not tempt or torment. He rules, patiently and perpetually, over the inevitable. His most famous myth, of course, is that of Persephone. The tale begins in sunlight, with flowers. Persephone, daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest, was picking blooms in a field when the earth opened. Hades rose in his chariot of obsidian and took her, down, down, beneath the roots of the world. Demeter searched the earth, refusing to let crops grow until her daughter was returned. And so, at last, a compromise was made. Persephone would spend part of the year above with her mother, and part below with her husband. Thus came the seasons. Spring and summer for joy, autumn and winter for mourning. Was it love? Was it power? The myths differ. But in the underworld, Persephone became queen. Not a captive, not merely a consort, but a ruler in her own right. She sat beside Hades, not behind him. She guided the dead past judgment, tended the pale gardens of the shades. And Hades? He did not rage. He did not betray. In all the stories, he is perhaps the only god who does not cheat, who does not stray. His realm was enough. His crown was enough. His queen was enough. He is often called Ploton, the rich one, for all things beneath the earth belong to him. Gold, silver, precious stones, seeds in the soil. From him come not only endings, but beginnings. Seeds must lie in darkness before they sprout, and Hades rules that darkness. He rarely appeared among the other gods. When he did, it was always for great cause. He aided in the war against the giants. He lent his helm of invisibility to Perseus, who used it to escape after slaying Medusa. But mostly he remained apart, watching, waiting, attending to his domain. His presence was felt in rituals of mourning, in the rustle of grave goods, in the hush after a final breath. Sacrifices to Hades were done at night, with black animals, the smoke sent downward. His name was spoken in whispers, or not at all. To call him drew his gaze, and that was a heavy thing. Yet not all feared him. At Eleusis, his name was part of the mystery rites that promised rebirth. In the Orphic traditions, he was not an ending, but a gatekeeper to the next beginning. Some even believed in cycles of life and death, of reincarnation. And Hades stood not as a wall, but as a door. Imagine him now, if you will, seated on a throne of volcanic stone, surrounded by shadow, his robe falling in quiet folds. Around him flicker the shades of those long gone, speaking in murmurs only the dead understand. Beside him, Persephone tends a garden of pale flowers that bloom without sun. The air smells faintly of myrrh and memory. He holds a sceptre, not to strike, but to signal order. The dead do not rise in rebellion. They do not need chains. The weight of time itself holds them in place. Unlike his brothers, Hades does not crave glory. He is not jealous of Olympus. He does not interfere with mortals unless they enter his domain without permission. And even then, he is more judge than executioner. He sets terms. He upholds them. Consider Orpheus, who came to plead for Eurydice. Hades listened. He agreed. He gave the poet a chance to lead her out, on one condition: do not look back. And when Orpheus did, Hades took nothing more than what was owed. There was no trickery, only the rules. In a world where even gods could be petty, Hades was consistent. Perhaps that is why, for all his distance, he was trusted. Feared, yes, but also trusted. And so the Greeks lived with him always in mind. Not in terror, but in acknowledgement. They built tombs with care. They left offerings. They remembered names. Because to be remembered was to remain just a little longer in the world above. Tonight, as you lay your head down, you need not fear the God below. He is not waiting in your shadow. He is keeping watch over those already gone. He tends a realm not of fire, but of memory. He sits in silence, because there is nothing more to prove. Sleep now. Let the earth hold you gently. Let your thoughts drift like leaves on the Acheron. Let the hush of that quiet kingdom lull you into rest. Hades waits, but not for you, not yet. He only waits as the world turns, and he always will. They say she was born not in the ordinary way, but from a headache, a rather severe one. Zeus, as the story goes, had swallowed her mother, Metis, the goddess of wisdom, because it had been foretold that she would bear a child mightier than he. Problem solved, he thought. But divine digestion is rarely the end of a tale in Greek myth. One day, Zeus began to suffer an unbearable pain in his skull. Gods gathered. Suggestions were made. Eventually Hephaestus, ever practical, struck Zeus's head with an axe. Out sprang Athena, fully grown and fully armed, a spear in one hand and a shield in the other, shouting a battle cry that echoed across Olympus. A dramatic entrance, even by divine standards. Athena, goddess of wisdom, war strategy, crafts and reason, arrived not as a child but as an idea made flesh, poised, calm, and already thinking 3 moves ahead. She wore a helm, bore the aegis of Zeus, and from her first breath demanded the respect of gods and mortals alike. Her presence on Olympus was distinct. Unlike many of her peers, Athena was not known for tempestuous love affairs or dramatic feuds over vanity, though she wasn't entirely above such things. She was measured, exacting, and rather fond of logic. In a realm of passion and power, she was principle personified. That said, she was not cold. She simply saw the long game. Cities and civilizations adored her. Most famously, of course, Athens itself took her name. The contest between Athena and Poseidon for the patronage of the city is one of these tales that reveals as much about Greek values as it does about the gods themselves. Poseidon, being who he was, offered a gift of grandeur. He struck the earth and produced a saltwater spring, or in some versions a warhorse. Either way impressive, but not terribly useful to the residents of a rocky inland city. Athena, ever pragmatic, planted the olive tree. Shade, food, oil, and wood, all from one gift. The Athenians chose her, and frankly, who wouldn't? From then on, Athena became more than a goddess to them. She was the guardian of their identity, their sense of civic pride, their pursuit of reason, art, and just war. Her temple, the Parthenon, still crowns the Acropolis today, its columns watching the Aegean like sentinels of marble. It remains not just a relic of ancient architecture, but a testament to her enduring spirit. Athena's approach to war was nothing like Ares' bloodlust. She preferred tactics, planning, the application of intelligence to conflict. She represented the mind in battle, not the frenzy. She advised heroes rather than charging in herself. Odysseus, in particular, earned her favour. His cunning, his guile, his talent for words over weapons, all were qualities she prized. She guided him home through storm and strife, always the voice of reason whispering beneath the chaos. But wisdom is not always gentle. Athena could be uncompromising, and when insulted her wrath was cold and enduring. Take the tale of Arachne, a mortal weaver whose skill was so great she dared claim superiority to the goddess herself. Athena, not known for indulging arrogance, challenged her to a contest. Arachne's tapestry was flawless, even daring to depict the gods in their less flattering moments. Athena, though impressed, tore it to shreds. She struck Arachne down, but, in a rare moment of mercy or poetic judgment, transformed her into the first spider, to weave forever. This balance of pride and precision defined Athena. She upheld honour, but never shied from asserting her place. She did not scream. She did not scheme. She simply stood her ground, and others yielded. She was also a patroness of crafts and invention. Pottery, weaving, architecture, all fell under her guidance. She inspired not just warriors, but artisans, philosophers, and lawmakers. Her symbol, the owl, denoted clear-sightedness, and was stamped on the coins of Athens. Wherever thoughtful hands shaped the world, Athena was there. Artists spoke her name before chiselling marble. Statesmen offered silent prayers before debating law. Curiously, she remained a virgin goddess, not in prudishness, but in independence. She did not marry. She did not pursue or yield to pursuit. Her loyalty lay with principle, not passion. This lent her a certain clarity, a steadiness untouched by the usual romantic entanglements that entangled her peers. She stood alone, and from each solitude came strength. Even her friends knew to tread carefully. When Tiresias, the blind prophet, accidentally witnessed her bathing, Athena struck him blind. But in fairness, she also gave him the gift of prophecy to balance the scales. Firm but fair. That was her way. In art, Athena is almost always armed, but never aggressive. Her shield often bore the head of Medusa, a grim gift from Perseus after his fateful quest. According to some tales, she aided him by guiding his hand, lending him tools, whispering courage. But her choice to place Medusa's face on her shield, that was something more. A warning, perhaps, or a reminder that wisdom does not flinch from horror. It absorbs it, reflects it, uses it. Athena had no shortage of temples across the Greek world. In addition to the Parthenon, sanctuaries in places like Delphi and Sparta honoured her many aspects: warrior, lawgiver, protector. Festivals such as the Panathenea celebrated her birth and her role in civic life, combining athletic contests, sacrifices, and parades of woven robes made in her honour. In one such rite, young women would carry offerings in silence, their steps measured, their robes flowing like water under olive trees. Her epithets tell the story of her scope: Athena Parthenos, the maiden; Athena Polias, of the city; Athena Promachos, she who fights in front; Athena Ergane, the industrious; Athena Nike, bearer of victory. She was many things, but never distant. Even in myth, she is the goddess most likely to walk beside mortals, to speak plainly, to guide without condescension. She saw potential where others saw fault. She offered guidance, not flattery; expectation, not indulgence. There were contradictions, of course. She upheld justice, but stood silent when her fellow gods acted with less than noble intent. She punished women who crossed lines, yet empowered heroes to defy the odds. But perhaps that was her wisdom, knowing when to act and when to wait. Not every wrong needed to be shouted down. Some could be corrected with time, with silence, with the long view. Athena always had the long view. She rarely raised her voice, but when she did, it was the sound of clear judgment, like bronze striking bronze in the still air before battle. A single note, impossible to ignore. Her advice was often laced with calm warnings, softly spoken truths. In council, the gods might argue for hours, but when Athena spoke, the room fell still. Her logic was not easily refuted. Her presence was not easily dismissed. Imagine her now, seated on her marble throne, high in the halls of Olympus. Her eyes are cool and calm, scanning scrolls of mortal deeds. She does not smile often, but when she does, it is the smile of one who sees potential, not perfection. Her owl perches silently nearby, and outside, the stars wheel in precise procession. Every movement above reflects her mind below. Quiet, deliberate, constant. Somewhere below, a child learns to write. A potter turns a wheel. A general marks a map. A philosopher pauses mid-thought, wondering from where the insight came. And in all these things, Athena stirs. She is not the flashiest of gods, not the loudest, but she is the one whose name is whispered in libraries and courtrooms, in war rooms and workshops. She is wisdom in bronze. And tonight, as you close your eyes and drift toward dreams, know that she keeps watch, not in thunder or fire, but in thought, in structure, in the still strength of what is rightly built. Sleep now, and if you dream, Let it be of olive groves and marble halls, of clear skies and steady hands. Athena is near, and she is thinking. In the soft glow before dawn, when the world holds its breath and the sky hesitates between silver and gold, two figures move through myth, twins, born of the same mother, destined to walk very different paths beneath the same ancient heavens. Apollo and Artemis, sunlight and moonlight, brother and sister, opposites and echoes. They were born on the island of Delos, a place said to have once drifted free in the sea until it anchored itself just in time to shelter their mother, Leto. Hera, ever so fond of revenge, and not at all fond of Zeus's many liaisons, had forbidden any land to receive Leto while she was pregnant. Delos, unrooted and wild, was not bound by such rules. And so, on that shifting soil beneath a curious sky, Leto gave birth to Artemis first, and then Apollo. From the beginning, they were not ordinary children. Artemis, it is said, helped deliver her brother, and thus became the goddess of childbirth and protector of the young. Apollo, radiant and golden, emerged second, but would come to embody light, music, poetry, prophecy, and healing. A resume so robust it might make even Hermes blink. The two were close, but distinct. Artemis claimed the wild, forests, mountains, creatures of the night. She roamed with her bow and hounds, untouched by civilization, untouched by men. A virgin goddess, her strength lay in independence, her power in her distance. She guarded the liminal spaces, dusk, wilderness, the edge of becoming. Apollo, by contrast, loved the centre, the sunlight, the lyre, the temple steps warm with afternoon heat. He ruled order and clarity, truth spoken through the lips of oracles, the measured beat of poetry, the clean line of sculpture. Where Artemis prowled under trees, Apollo strode into plazas, head lifted, every step in rhythm. And yet they remained mirrors of each other. Where he brought the day, she drew the night. Where he offered reason, she guarded mystery. They did not oppose one another, but completed a circle. Apollo's most famous shrine was at Delphi, where the oracle of the Pythia would sit upon a tripod and speak his prophecies, often in riddles that twisted fate and free will into a single thread. Pilgrims came from across the Greek world to ask their questions and receive their cryptic answers. And though the responses were maddeningly vague at times, Apollo's gift was not in simplicity, it was in insight. He was also a musician beyond compare. His lyre, given to him by Hermes in apology for a rather cheeky cattle theft, became a symbol of celestial harmony. With it, he could soothe storms, calm minds, and sway hearts. His songs were not merely entertainment, they were structure, soul, cosmos turned into melody. But Apollo was not all light. His stories, like those of all the Olympians, carry shadows. He loved often and disastrously. Daphne, a nymph who fled him, was turned into a laurel tree to escape his pursuit. Coronis, whom he loved, betrayed him, and he struck her down, only to save their unborn child, Asclepius, god of medicine. His wrath was precise, his grief enduring. Artemis too had her shadows. She punished those who saw her without consent. Actaeon, a hunter, stumbled upon her bathing and was transformed into a stag, torn apart by his own hounds. She was protective to the point of fury, unyielding in her expectations. But she was also kind to those who honoured her solitude. She guarded the vulnerable, walked beside maidens, lent her strength to women in labour, and was invoked in the hush of moonlit prayers. Unlike her brother, Artemis built no cities. Her temples were often deep in forests or perched on cliffside paths. She preferred the company of nymphs, wild animals and stars, and yet her worship was widespread. From Ephesus to Broron, from Arcadia to Sicily, girls danced in her honour, shedding their childhood names in rites of passage that whispered of transformation. Together, Apollo and Artemis represented more than light and dark. They were a pair of divine principles: reason and intuition, civilization and wilderness, speech and silence, the bow that hunted and the lyre that healed, and always, always they remained siblings, never rivals, never strangers. One tale tells of the Gigantomachy, the battle between the gods and the giants. In it, Apollo and Artemis fought side by side. He struck with arrows of burning gold, she with arrows silver cold. Together they felled foes far larger than themselves, their aim unwavering, their cause righteous. The sun and moon fought as one. Another myth speaks of the death of Niobe's children. Niobe, a queen, mocked Leto for having only 2 offspring, while she herself had many. Enraged by the insult, Artemis and Apollo took up their bows. One by one, they struck down Niobe's children. He the sons, she the daughters. Only one child, in some versions, was spared. Niobe fled, weeping, and was turned to stone, a waterfall of endless mourning. The lesson, while grim, was clear. Do not mock the mother of light and shadow. And yet these myths were not simply warnings. They were mirrors held to the human heart, showing how passion, loyalty, and power play out in forms larger than life. Through these stories, the Greeks explored the very structure of feeling. Apollo and Artemis did not merely punish or protect. They expressed divine aspects of our own inner worlds. Apollo, the god of healing, was also the god of plague. A single note from his bow could bring sickness, another restoration. Artemis, goddess of the hunt, was both life-giver and death-dealer to animals. They held paradox in their palms, like a bowstring stretched between extremes. Historically, their worship shaped much of Greek religious life. At Delphi, Apollo's oracle defined political decisions, voyages, and even wars. The Delian League took its name from his birthplace. Athletes swore oaths in his name before the Pythian Games, held every 4 years in his honour. Artemis, meanwhile, was central to rites of maturity. At Broron, girls approaching womanhood took part in rituals where they dressed as bears, an echo of Artemis's role as guardian of transitions. Her sanctuary at Ephesus, with its massive temple and statues adorned with symbols of fertility and wildlife, was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The Romans, too, honoured them. Apollo remained Apollo, a rare instance of continuity. Artemis became Diana, and her image continued to stalk moonlit groves, untamed and untouched. In art, Apollo is shown as youthful, beardless, often holding his lyre or bow. His face is serene, his posture poised. He represents the ideal: balance, grace, harmony. Artemis, in contrast, is swift and sure. Her robes swirl as she moves, her gaze sharp as the silver tip of her arrow. She is both the stillness of the forest and the sudden snap of a branch. Imagine them now, side by side at the edge of the world. Apollo lifts the sun once more, the sky flushed with gold. Birds begin to stir, songs gently warming the air. Behind him, Artemis draws the moon down, folding it in shadow. The stars sigh, a deer steps softly through mist, and between them, the world wakes. They do not speak, but they do not need to. They have walked this dance since time began. Apollo glances east, where day waits with open arms. Artemis turns west into the deep hush of the woods, and for a moment their paths cross, light and dark, brother and sister. Sleep now. Let moonlight guide you toward dreams. Let the last golden chords of Apollo's lyre fade into stillness. The twins keep their watch, and the world for now is balanced. Settle in now. Let the sounds of battle fade, and the clang of hammers grow gentle. Tonight we visit two gods so different in nature they rarely share a page, yet here they are, side by side in our dreams. One is fury with a sword, the other fire with a purpose. Ares and Hephaestus, the god of war, and the god of the forge. Together they paint a curious picture of masculinity in ancient Greece. One all brawn and blood, the other limping but brilliant. And if the myths are to be believed, which at bedtime we rather hope they are, the Olympian family didn't quite know what to do with either of them. Ares, son of Zeus and Hera, was the personification of raw, untamed violence. Not the tactical war of generals, not the careful strategy of Athena. No, Ares was the thundering heart, the rising scream, the blind charge into chaos. The Greeks called him Ares, and while they respected what he represented, they didn't exactly invite him to dinner. Even Zeus, his own father mind you, was famously unimpressed. In Homer's Iliad, Zeus calls Ares the most hateful of all the gods, and not in the sort of way that implies playful teasing over wine. Ares embodied the kind of war that scorched fields and toppled cities for no reason at all. He delighted in the clash of bronze on bronze, the whinny of panicked horses, the cries of dying men. His companions were equally charming: Phobos, fear; Deimos, terror; and Eris, strife. They followed him into battle like an entourage no mortal would dare invite to a feast. And yet, despite his ferocity, Ares wasn't particularly successful. He lost duels. He was once trapped in a jar for months by two mortal sons of Poseidon. Yes, a god of war, corked like pickled olives. It's enough to make one wonder if the Greeks were having a quiet laugh at his expense. But contrast Ares with how the Romans saw him. Mars, as they called him, was revered, honoured, worshipped with parades. While the Greeks regarded Ares with caution, the Romans embraced him as a symbol of disciplined might and empire. A curious shift, perhaps reflecting the values of a rising military power versus a culture that preferred wit, reason, and an afternoon of philosophy in the shade. Still, there's something almost endearing about Ares. He wears his passion plainly. He falls, and oh, how he falls, madly for Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty. And what a pair they made! She, radiant and sly; he, straightforward and smitten. Their affair, though secret, was not subtle. They were caught in the act by Hephaestus, her husband, who ensnared them in a net of his own making. Now, that brings us to our second god tonight, the quiet, smouldering power of the forge. Hephaestus, the divine blacksmith, son of Hera, and depending on which version you prefer, perhaps without a father at all. Some say Hera bore him alone in revenge for Zeus birthing Athena from his head. That's Olympian parenting for you, equal parts miracle and pettiness. But Hephaestus was born lame, and in the glistening society of gods, where beauty and power were expected, he stood apart. Myths differ. In one, Hera throws him from Olympus in disgust. In another, it's Zeus who does so after a disagreement. Either way, the poor lad gets launched off a cloud and crashes into the sea, where kindly sea nymphs raise him. Now that would make for an awkward family reunion, wouldn't it? But Hephaestus doesn't brood forever. He learns, he builds. In time, he returns to Olympus, not with wrath, but with skill. And what skill it is. He creates thrones, automatons, palaces of bronze. He crafts Achilles' shield, so intricate that poets had to stop and describe it for hundreds of lines. He builds Pandora, the first woman, fashioned so finely she was irresistible. Hephaestus is quite simply the patron of invention, and not just of swords and armour, but of every tool, every spark of progress shaped by hand. Where Ares is destruction, Hephaestus is creation through flame. The hammer and anvil become his altar. The ancients recognized this. He had cults across Greece, especially in Athens and on Lemnos, the volcanic island that claimed to be his earthly home. There, fires were sacred, and every blacksmith was a kind of priest, echoing their divine patron in sweat and soot. In Athens, Hephaestus shared a temple with Athena, a pairing not romantic, but symbolic. She brought wisdom, he brought the means to build it. Craftsmanship and cleverness side by side. And yet, for all his brilliance, Hephaestus rarely wins in myth. His marriage to Aphrodite is unfaithful. His traps are ingenious, but they rarely solve his loneliness. He is powerful, but not worshipped for his appearance or charm. In this way, he is one of the more relatable gods, not draped in glory, but labouring in the shadows, forging the world while others fight over it. And maybe that's the secret. Because the Greeks, for all their love of myth, were practical. They built, they reasoned, they argued in the agora, and laid stones in perfect lines. While Ares might shout and wave his sword, Hephaestus quietly forged the hinge it swung on. Still, they're both part of the same divine family, and one imagines the dinners on Olympus were, well, complicated. Imagine it. Ares boasting of a battlefield drenched in glory, while Hephaestus scowls over a scorch mark on his latest sculpture. Hera sighs, Apollo plucks a judgmental chord, Dionysus refills everyone's cup. Aphrodite checks her reflection in a polished shield, and somewhere in the back, Hermes snickers. But beneath the myth, there's something ancient and telling here. These two gods represent a duality that every civilization wrestles with: force and function, chaos and craft, fire that burns and fire that builds. We must remember that war, though often glorified in poetry, was a terrifying reality. The Greeks were no strangers to conflict. Hoplite battles, city-state skirmishes, Persian invasions. They had seen what war could do. And perhaps that's why Ares was kept at arm's length. A necessary force, but not an honoured guest. In contrast, the tools of Hephaestus were present in every life. The plough, the spear, the loom's axle, the temple's columns, all bore the echo of his forge. To praise him was to praise civilization itself. In vase paintings and statuary, Hephaestus is often depicted with muscular arms, soot-blackened face, and a short workman's tunic. He doesn't glow with ethereal light. He sweats, he bends metal, he limps with purpose. Ares, on the other hand, is all sharp lines and bronze gleam. Plumed helmet, shield at the ready, chin held just so. His beauty is as carefully wrought as his sword, but somehow always less trustworthy. And so the Greeks taught their children, strength alone is not enough. Building create, work with your hands, let the fire warm, not consume. Still, perhaps Ares needed to exist, if only to remind us how precious peace is. and Hephaestus, for all his trials, remained indispensable. Even the gods needed a smith. As we drift further into stillness, think of the forge, glowing softly in the night, surrounded by tools, half-finished wonders, and the scent of warm metal. No shouting, no clashing spears. Only quiet firelight and the slow rhythm of the hammer. Perhaps the heart of Olympus wasn't in the throne room, but in the forge below. And somewhere, deep in the mountain halls, a god with a limp and a mind of steel continues to shape the world, while far above, a war god sharpens his blade, just in case. Let the sparks fade now. One by one, the fire dims. The clang of iron grows faint, and the gods ever flawed fall silent as sleep draws near. Close your eyes and let the rules of the waking world loosen their grip. Tonight we drift with the tricksters, the ones who cross boundaries, blur identities, and chuckle when the map doesn't match the terrain. We're stepping off the polished marble steps of Olympus and wandering instead down a vine-choked path that smells faintly of wine, wildflowers, and something just a little forbidden. These are the gods of transition, of thresholds, of masks, mischief, and mystery. Dionysus and Hermes. One pours the wine, the other steals your sandals. And together, they lead us to the edges of what it means to be human. Let's begin with Dionysus. You may think of him as the god of wine, which he is, but he is so much more than that. He's the god of release, of madness and ecstasy, of letting go of the self. A paradox in Ivy, both comforting and terrifying. His origin story is tangled as it should be. Some say he was born of Semele, a mortal princess, and Zeus, who, in classic Zeus fashion, visited her in secret. But Semele, tricked by a jealous Hera, asked to see Zeus in his full divine form. And mortals, it seems, are not built for thunder. She perished in flame, and Zeus, in a rather creative act of divine obstetrics, rescued the unborn Dionysus and sewed him into his own thigh. Yes, you heard that right. Dionysus was born again from Zeus's leg. It's not elegant, but it's memorable. From the moment of his birth, Dionysus lived between worlds, mortal and divine, Greek and foreign, male and feminine, sane and not so sane. He wandered, he grew, and wherever he went, vines burst through the earth. Panthers followed him. Women, called maenads, danced barefoot in the woods, possessed by his presence. And behind the joy, there was always a shadow of danger. Because Dionysus is not just the god of wine, he is the god of what wine does. He is the one who shows you who you really are, or who you're trying very hard not to be. To the Greeks, Dionysus embodied the part of life that broke through structure. He was worshipped in ecstatic rites, sometimes at night, sometimes deep in the woods. The Orphic mysteries and Bacchic festivals allowed initiates to slip free from identity, gender, class, duty, and taste, for a moment, the freedom of dissolution. It wasn't always peaceful. Pentheus, a proud Theban king, tried to suppress the cult of Dionysus. The god, disguised as a gentle priest, lured him into observing the women's rites. But Pentheus was torn apart, quite literally, by his own mother, driven mad by the god's power. And yet, Dionysus wasn't a villain. He was balance. He came at the end of winter. He came after loss. He was the return of vitality, the wild joy that reminds us we're alive. And for all his chaos, he was beloved. Temples rose in his name. Theatres were built in his honour. The City Dionysia festival in Athens became the birthplace of tragedy and comedy alike. a sacred celebration of storytelling, masks, and human emotion. Because theatre, like Dionysus himself, walks the line between illusion and truth. Now turn from the forest and follow the flutter of wings. Or is it just a whisper of sandals on marble? Hermes is here. If Dionysus teaches us how to lose control, Hermes shows us how to navigate it. The messenger god, the guide of souls, the trickster with a grin that suggests he's already stolen whatever it is you're looking for. Hermes is the god of transitions, of travel, commerce, invention, and thievery. He is the protector of boundaries, and the one who slips right through them. Born in a cave, he was walking and stealing before the end of his first day. One of his first acts? Stealing Apollo's cattle, and not only stealing them, disguising his footprints by walking backward and crafting sandals out of bark. By sunset, he'd invented the lyre, made from a tortoise shell and gut strings, and charmed his way out of punishment by offering it as a gift to Apollo. That's Hermes, fast, clever, and just disarming enough to get away with it. But he's not just a jokester. Hermes had a vital role in Greek religion. He was Psychopompos, the soul guide, the one who led the dead to the underworld. Not judging, not punishing, simply escorting. A quiet presence at the moment of death, neither feared nor worshipped too loudly, but always needed. To the ancients, he was in the crossroads, the boundaries between fields, the liminal places where magic happens. Travellers left offerings to him in the form of herms, stone pillars topped with his head, often with an anatomically conspicuous addition carved just below. These stood as guardians of movement, fertility, and cheeky reminders of divine presence in the everyday. Hermes was also the god of merchants, of trade, negotiation, and yes, the occasional scam. But in the ancient world, that was part of the game. Commerce was sacred, and Hermes, ever adaptable, was both its protector and its jester. He appears everywhere, on coins, in plays, in dreams, a flicker of winged sandals across the sky. And here's where things get interesting. Because while Dionysus and Hermes are not often paired directly in myth, they are spiritual cousins. They are both liminal. They both connect opposites. Life and death, mortal and divine, order and chaos. They are gods of change. And in the ancient world, change was something to be respected, even feared, because it reminded people that the line between the civilized and the wild was thinner than we like to admit. In some Orphic traditions, Dionysus is linked with the soul's rebirth, torn apart by titans, reborn in fire. Hermes, meanwhile, appears in esoteric texts as a keeper of hidden knowledge, later merging with Egyptian Thoth to become Hermes Trismegistus, father of alchemy and the mystical arts. Between them, these two gods whisper a strange truth, that transformation is divine, that the in-between is sacred. The Greeks understood this. Their myths weren't meant to be consistent. They were meant to reflect life, messy, contradictory, and beautifully uncertain. And so, when a festival was held for Dionysus, with its masks and madness, it wasn't just about wine. It was about freedom. About feeling, for one night, that the world could bend, and maybe, just maybe, you could let go. And when a traveller stepped onto a road, uncertain of where it led, a prayer to Hermes wasn't just about reaching a destination. It was about protection in the unknown. A little luck, a little cleverness, a little mischief, just enough to make the journey interesting. In art, they appear in vivid contrast. Dionysus is crowned with ivy, robes slipping from his shoulders, holding a wine cup or a thyrsus, a staff wrapped in vines and crowned with a pine cone. His gaze is distant, ecstatic, as if he's watching something only the initiated can see. Hermes is lean, athletic, winged. On his hat, on his sandals, sometimes even on his ankles. He holds a caduceus, the staff with two serpents twined, which began as a symbol of negotiation, and later, quite curiously, ended up as a symbol for modern medicine. Together they tell us that not all gods are warriors or rulers. Some are wanderers. Some dance in the dark. Some laugh at locked doors and step through them anyway. And that, for the Greeks, was a comfort. That even in uncertainty, even in death or madness or stolen cattle, there were gods who understood. Gods who would walk with you, laugh with you, guide you. So now as you breathe more slowly, and your thoughts soften like dusk on the Aegean, imagine them. Dionysus in a clearing, music playing softly, surrounded by flickering torches and dancers, who have no need for names. Hermes on the road just ahead, a knowing look on his face, a coin in his pocket, ready to walk with you to the next chapter, wherever that may be. The vines settle, the wind quiets, the road becomes still, and two divine mischief makers quietly fade into dreams. The hearth, the grave, and the quiet gods at the centre of the world. Take a deep breath and let it out slowly. We've wandered with warriors, dined with tricksters, stood beneath thunderclouds, and danced through vineyards. But now, in this final chapter, we come to a still place, a place of rest and of presence. Not absence, but the kind of quiet you find when you've arrived home and closed the door behind you. Tonight, we visit the two most overlooked gods in the Olympian family, Hestia and Hades. They don't seek the spotlight. They don't meddle, chase mortals, or fling weapons across the sky. In fact, they rarely leave their posts at all. One keeps the fire burning in every home. The other keeps watch over every soul. They are constancy and return, beginning and end. And despite the myth's focus on louder, flashier figures, without them, the whole divine order would simply fall apart. Let's begin with Hestia. She is the eldest of the Olympians, the firstborn child of the Titans Cronus and Rhea, and the first to be swallowed whole by her father. Charming family, the Titans. You may remember, Cronus, paranoid about being overthrown, decided the best course of action was to eat his children. Hestia, being the eldest, went in first. When Zeus eventually forced Cronus to regurgitate his siblings with the help of a rather aggressive herbal tonic, Hestia was the last to emerge, and so she was both the firstborn and the last released, making her, quite poetically, the Alpha and the Omega of the Olympian order. Yet for all that drama, Hestia is perhaps the least dramatic deity of them all. She doesn't rage, she doesn't seduce or scheme, she doesn't even go on adventures. Instead, she simply remains. Hestia is the goddess of the hearth, the sacred fire at the centre of every Greek home, temple, and city. The hearth wasn't just a place to warm your hands or boil lentils. It was the spiritual anchor of life. Families gathered around it. Offerings were made at it. Prayers began and ended in its flickering glow. In every Greek household, Hestia's flame was a quiet promise that no matter how turbulent the world outside became, there was a place, even a small one, of warmth, safety, and belonging. She never married. She was courted, yes. Both Poseidon and Apollo tried their luck. but she politely declined, took a vow of eternal virginity, and went on quietly tending the fire. When the 12 thrones of Olympus were distributed, she stepped aside to let Dionysus, the youngest, have a place. She didn't make a fuss, she didn't sulk. She simply chose the centre over the summit. And in that centre, she became the most constant presence in all Greek life. In cities like Athens, a sacred flame to Hestia burned in the Prytaneum. The public hearth kept ever alight. When a colony was founded, fire was taken from that hearth and carried across the sea so that the new settlement could begin with Hestia's blessing. In this way, she linked the old world and the new, one glowing ember at a time. She had no grand temples, because every home was her temple. She had no epic poetry, because her story was not one of conquest or calamity. She simply was. She made every rite, every offering, and every home possible. Even at the start of any public or private sacrifice, the Greeks invoked Hestia first. Before the meat hit the altar, before the libation was poured, there was Hestia. At the end, as the last drop of wine spilled and the smoke rose skyward, there she was again. To us that might seem modest, but to the Greeks it was reverence of the highest sort. If Athena was the mind of the city and Artemis its wild edge, Hestia was its heart, quietly beating, never drawing attention, but always there. Now shift with me from the hearth to the depths of the earth, to another god who rarely spoke, but who ruled over far more than most realized. Hades, lord of the underworld. He, too, was a child of Cronus and Rhea, and he too was swallowed and later rescued by Zeus. When the war against the Titans was won, the 3 brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, cast lots to divide the cosmos. Zeus drew the sky, Poseidon the sea, and Hades drew the lot of the underworld. Now let's be clear, he wasn't cast down. He didn't lose. He simply got the job no one else wanted, quietly, responsibly, and without complaint. And for that reason, he was misunderstood. In later ages, especially in Roman and Christian-influenced retellings, Hades was twisted into a demonic figure. But to the Greeks, he wasn't evil. He was inevitable. His realm wasn't hell. It was simply after, the natural destination of every mortal life. To them, Hades was a somber, dignified ruler. Strict, yes, but not cruel. In fact, he's one of the few gods who is never shown cheating on his wife or interfering in mortal affairs just for fun. His name means the unseen one, and his helmet, the famous helm of darkness, allowed him to move invisibly even among gods. A fitting symbol for a god whose work was constant but invisible. He ruled with fairness and order. He kept the shades of the dead from wandering, and ensured that each soul received its due, whether in the sunless meadows of Asphodel, the blissful fields of Elysium, or the shadowy depths of Tartarus for the truly wicked. He was feared, yes, but fear can be respectful. In fact, people avoided speaking his name altogether. Euphemisms like Pluton, meaning wealth giver, became common. After all treasures of the earth came from below. Gold, silver, crops, stability. Hades, in this guise, wasn't the god of doom, but of hidden riches. And then there's Persephone, the queen of the underworld, his equal in title and power. The myth is well known. Hades falls for Persephone and carries her off to his realm. Her mother, Demeter, goddess of the harvest, grieves, and the earth withers. Eventually, a deal is struck. Persephone will spend part of the year with Hades and part with her mother. Thus came the seasons. Spring when she returns, winter when she departs. It's easy to cast Persephone as a victim, but in the older mystery cult versions of the tale, she is powerful, chosen, even willing. Queen not just in name but in role, a guide to the dead and a bridge between life and the afterlife. And Hades, he remains faithful. Unlike Zeus and Poseidon, he has no wandering eye, no scandal. His love, while strange in form, is singular. This subtle stability was recognized in cult practice. At Eleusis, the initiates of the mysteries learned sacred secrets of death, of return, of rebirth, and central to it all was Hades, not a tormentor, but a keeper, a god who made sure nothing was lost forever, only transformed. So here, in this final chapter, we find something curious. The Olympian family is filled with movement, war, lust, laughter, rage. But at either end, bookending the myths like candles on a shrine, are two figures who do not chase, who do not flee, who simply hold. Hestia at the centre of the home, Hades at the centre of the earth. One keeps the fire burning, the other welcomes the flame when it fades, and neither boasts, though they touch every moment of life. From the first breath by the cradle to the last sigh at the tombstone, Hestia and Hades are there. In art, they are quiet. Hestia appears veiled, seated, serene, a modest woman holding a flame. Hades, often bearded and reserved, sits beside Persephone, sometimes with a cornucopia, a reminder that what lies beneath nourishes what grows above. And perhaps that's the lesson the Greeks left us. That glory isn't always loud, that power doesn't always parade, that the greatest forces in life are those that simply endure. So now, let the fire burn low, let the earth cradle your thoughts. In one corner of the hearth, a flame flickers, constant, unbothered by wind or time. Far below, in quiet halls of stone, a king walks the corridors of memory, steady and patient. And in between, everything we are. Let Hestia hold your dreams. Let Hades guard your rest. And let sleep take you gently, where the gods who stayed home still keep their watch.